Good afternoon and welcome to this event with the APM put on by the Channel Isles Committee. We're a local committee representing the Association for Project Management, the chartered body for the project profession. We operate across Jersey and Guernsey, and aside from promoting best practice project management, running events such as this one, or hopefully physical events in the not too distant future, we are working primarily on education initiatives at the moment, as well as encouraging APM student, associate, individual and corporate membership across the Channel Islands. As part of the education pieces, we are looking to establish project management apprenticeships in both Jersey and Guernsey, and we're making pretty good progress on those fronts at the moment. If you're interested in learning more about our APM committee, and indeed if you are an APM member and would be interested in volunteering, even for just a few hours a month, please do get in touch with me. Now, on to today's event. The world of financial services is complex, it's heavily complicated, exceptionally competitive, highly regulated, and in terms of project delivery, they have to operate within the currently chaotic environment just as the rest of us do with COVID-19, Brexit, and so on. And yet many firms are required to undertake steps to mitigate risks, with many undertaking the same steps multiple times on the same clients, as the requirements to know your client are among the most rigorous. The process is highly complex and costly, and in Jersey, financial services clients typically have a local lawyer, a bank, an accountant, a wealth advisor or corporate service provider. So the whole process is duplicated and inefficient, and yet mandatory for firms to undertake. Technology is a solution to this, but how do firms, especially competitors, collaborate to solve a common problem? The answer, of course, is through project management, and the APM CI are delighted to welcome Gui to share insights on this topic and their work in Jersey. So Gui, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carl. And first of all, thanks to Rob and the whole APM team for giving us the opportunity to present the project to you all today. Yeah, as the title of the presentation suggests, I'm going to be talking about a project where we brought together a bunch of competitors and helped them create a structure around which they can collaborate on a common goal. I'm going to give you a quick sort of high-level highlight on the project itself, what I'm about to present, and then talk a little bit about myself and the organization I represent as well. So the project is really a collaboration between competitors in the form of a working group, and they came together to solve a common problem, but more importantly, they came together to create technology to solve that problem collaboratively. We ran the project in the Channel Islands. It was led by Digital Jersey, which is an organization within Jersey, sort of responsible for the digital aspects and digital transformation aspects of organizations on the island. We facilitated the working group from the Mesh ID side, and it took place from January to December 2020. So those of you who are sharp on the dates probably realize that that's sort of the bulk of the pandemic. So there'll be some interesting learnings that we had that we've taken out of how to manage a project initially in person and then remote. This project resulted in a market-ready solution, the Mesh ID CBD sharing product that was released at the end of this year, or the end of last year, beginning of this year. So the agenda for the presentation or for the webinar, I'm going to give you a brief overview on the industry, the stakeholders, just to sort of set the scene. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining the problem, and I think Carl alluded to it a little bit, but I think it's important to understand the problem that we were solving as a project to really understand why we needed to do this collaboratively and why it was not possible to do any other way. Give you a bit of an idea of how we approached the change, how we structured the project and governance, and which methodology we chose, but more importantly, why we made these decisions when we did. A few challenges that we faced and lessons learned, and well, the outcome of the project, what we actually delivered at the end. But to start with, who am I? I'm Gui Vohringer. I am, well, most of my career in financial services. I like to say I have one foot in the world of technology. In a past life, I had a technical background, and I've moved more and more towards sort of operations and business strategy. So I have one foot in the technology, one foot in business, and I like to translate sometimes crazy ramblings between the two worlds, a lot of miscommunication as well. So I like to sort of sit in that intersection. I am an agile product owner, and that will become well, the reason why I mentioned this will become relevant during the presentation. Also a Lean Six Sigma black belt, again very useful, came in handy in this project as well. And I am the co-founder, or one of the co-founders of MeshID. So just a very, very brief introduction as to who we are at MeshID. So MeshID is a technology company, Dutch-based. I'm actually connecting through Amsterdam at the moment. It's not very sunny here, in case you're wondering, which is pretty normal for Amsterdam. So why do we exist as MeshID? Well, as Carl alluded to, this process of actually identifying yourself to a financial service provider is extremely difficult. And we believe, and the reason we exist is to make this process as easy as handing over a passport at an airport, so make this process as easy as possible. We do that by creating portable digital identities, so an identity for your organization or individuals that contains all the information that an organization that's onboarding you would need to know about you. So that's what we do. How we do it, how we build this profile is we automate the collection and verification of information, and more importantly, we facilitate the sharing of this information across different providers. For that, we use the latest in verification, biometric, and privacy technologies. All of this fancy stuff really boils down to bringing a process which can take months down to mere minutes. So this is very much how we approach change at MeshID. We are looking for 10x, so we're striving for 10x. We don't like 10, 20, 30% improvements, because we are founded by a group of sort of veterans of the financial services industry, and the frustrated veterans, which are, we always felt like things weren't moving fast enough. The world of technology was moving very fast. The world of financial services was sort of lagging behind, and we saw the orders of magnitude potential for transformation, and we strive for that. So that could be 10 times faster, onboarding someone 10 times faster, 10 times less errors. For those of you who work in the industry know that data quality is a big issue. Improved margins, obviously, for the organizations, but I think more importantly than anything these days is happier customers. And your decision to work with a service provider, be it financial services or otherwise, really sometimes comes down to how well the experience is with working with them. So that's a little bit about MeshID. In terms of the project, just to set the scene for where the project was started and what the focus area was, it is the world of financial services, but it is focused more on the corporate side, so not so much on the consumer side. We are in the corporate side more in the direction of banking and investment, and within investment specifically looking at private equity and real estate funds. So what are funds, for those of you who don't know, it's a very simple idea, really. It's a bunch of people or companies that have some money and like to put that all in sort of one big pile, and have somebody who thinks they know what they're doing, oftentimes they do, invest that money and grow that money, right? So that's really at its basic level what a fund is. Unfortunately, things are not that simple in the world of financial services. Starting a private equity fund, a place where money comes together to then invest in other companies, requires a lot of work. So, somebody's got to hold the money, right? So there's a custodian bank, someone's got to draw up the legal papers, so the lawyers involved, notaries, someone's got to manage the money, fund manager, investment manager, and someone has to do the accounting and administration of the fund, making sure that the investors know how much their stake is worth and have an overview of their ownership in the fund. So you can imagine these are a lot of parties that sort of surround a fund, which can make the interactions quite complex. So that's sort of the harsh reality of delivering a financial service. Now, another harsh reality these days, unfortunately, is that there are bad actors in the world, and they like to move money through the financial system, bad money specifically. They like to launder money. They like to use funds as a way to launder money or for finance terrorism or just simply to avoid tax. So there are regulators watching all this activity in the area of funds, right? So there's a lot of oversight from regulators on how funds are set up. And these regulations have increased over time. So there's been an exponential growth in the last few years of these regulations, and therefore the cost of compliance, or the cost of complying with the regulations, has skyrocketed over the last 5 to 10 years. So that's the cost of compliance, but the cost of non-compliance, of not complying with these regulations, has also gone up exponentially. So last year saw a record high of 10.6 billion just in AML fines, just in financial services. So, parties are very scared when working with funds to make sure that they know who the investor is. So if someone is putting money in, who are they? Where do they come from? Who's behind them? Where did the money come from? So this is a big question that these service providers have about these investors. And for us, non-financial service provider people, finding information for us is pretty simple. You just go on Google and you type the search string and that's it. But unfortunately for financial service providers, that's just not a reality. They need to collect and verify a lot of information about these investors, and it takes a lot of time to do that. And I think one of the worst things is that these activities are really performed by the highly educated people that are very expensive, but it's essentially menial collection and verification work. So this means onboarding an investor to a fund can take up to 3 months, even more, which is extremely painful for the investor, but also for the service providers. Can take upwards of 3 hours of a staff member within one of these organizations to do the collection and verification work. And you can imagine, as I mentioned before, this is okay potentially for one provider, but now you have many providers when you want to invest in a fund that need to know who you are. And now multiply that across all the different funds that you invest in. So an investor will not invest in one fund, they'll invest in multiple funds. So I hope you sort of get an idea of the size of this problem. It's extremely impactful for the investor, but also for these organizations. Now, that's exactly what the project aims to solve. This idea that there's essentially the same KYC, know your customer, know your client information that is collected and verified by each of these service providers interacting with the fund investor. And we use the fund investor just as a means of narrowing the scope of the project, but really this could be anyone interacting with any financial service. For the providers, that cause a huge amount of repetition of work across them, also within them. Everyone has to start from square one. There's underutilized AML staff as well. Moments of peak will have a lot of work, and when no funds are opening, there'll be no work. Everyone will have outdated information, meaning that a fund's lifetime could be 7 to 10 years. Something could have happened with that investor in that time that you might not know of. So there's a huge increase in risk there for these providers, and generally a high burden on them to perform audits and checks and tests. So the project had as an aim to solve this problem, and at a very high level was to say, this idea that, well, shouldn't the investor be able to provide this information once, and shouldn't all these parties surrounding the fund or multiple funds be able to access this information that they have there? So that's exactly what what our project aimed to do, was to create some means of securely sharing information that's trusted and verified across the different providers. And we focused on fund administrators, managers, and banks, which means improving the speed of launching a fund significantly, meaning that money can be invested quicker, meaning that you can make money quicker. So it's extreme importance to these fund managers. We reduce operational costs on these AML activities, anti-money laundering activities for these providers, and reduce the risk of having out-of-date information, and just generally create a lot more visibility and control of data ownership. So you can imagine from the dancing with elephants slide I mentioned, I showed you before, where one investor is interacting with multiple parties. Very quickly they lose track of who they gave their information to, who has access to their information. So it's extremely important for them to gain control of that process again. So I hope that shows you that this is a problem which is not necessarily only contained within one organization, and one organization cannot solve this problem. You need to collaborate, and we need to share and work together to solve this problem collaboratively. The great thing is, everyone wants change, right? So when change is announced, everyone says, great, yes, I don't like doing things the way I do. It costs a lot of money. Yeah, something different would be great, right? Now, if you ask them to change, of course, nobody really wants to change. So it's a difficult uphill battle from the get-go. But I think even more difficult is if you're asking some parties to lead this change, right? So this is really the crux of the project, and really where we had to think creatively on how we structure the project to make sure that we sort of deal with this resistance to change and resistance to leading the change. So we used some well-known methodologies from John Kotter, for example, the 8-step process for leading change. We thought this is a good model to use, and the main points of that really is that you need to create a climate. You need to create an environment where change can happen, first of all. Then you need to engage the parties that are going to be involved in that change, and then implement the change and sustain it. So that's really at a high level, the steps that we followed. Now, doing this within one organization is tough. Everyone sort of acknowledges that, but doing this across multiple organizations is very, very difficult. So first of all, how did we create a sense of urgency? So we showed the movement in the market. We showed them, hey, look, there's things happening, external factors happening that are sort of pushing you and pushing your industry to change. So the question is, are you going to be one of those that change or not? There are forward-thinking competitors that are changing, and are you with them, or are they going to be ahead of you? You know, looking at your costs, are they sustainable? I think one of the biggest questions we asked them was, you know, is this something that you think that over 5 or 10 years you'll be able to continue to operate as you do today? Will your margins decrease? Right. These are all questions that we had to ask to sort of give them this idea that, look, there's an urgency for change. Their idea of more work being more people is also not scalable. So we created this sort of sense of urgency, this vision of what the world would look like, and sort of try to paint this picture of, you know, are they part of this new world or not? So once we created that sense of urgency, we of course needed to sell the vision. Now, traditionally with change projects, what happens, of course, is that you bring together a group of people, you create the vision together, and then you go out and sell the vision across the organization. Well, we didn't have that luxury. In order to bring the organizations together initially, we needed to have a vision, a change vision in place. So we did this internally within the project team between Digital Jersey and Mesh ID, and of course, in collaboration with some parties within the industry. You know, we had to go out and go on a roadshow essentially and recruit parties to the working group. So we had to form the coalition. We had to form this working group. So for us, that was involved a lot of explaining what is in it for them, right? So is it saving you costs? Is it But I think what the thing that resonated the most with them was this idea of being perceived as a thought leader in the space. Everyone talks about wanting to adopt new technologies. Everyone thinks that that's a commercial advantage. So being able to position these organizations as forward-thinking, organizations that really care about the experience of their investors and of their clients would sort of put them in a good light. So that's something that really motivated them to join the working group. Of course, they also got early access to the software itself, discounts, but I think more importantly, they got to shape the software as well. They got to have a say in what the software did. But we failed a lot. We had a lot of failed memberships. We pitched to companies that were maybe not ready to join. They maybe not were, or maybe not quite of the right mindset, had internal struggles. So there was a lot of trial and error there to find and form the coalition. So once we did that, once we got a group of organizations, we thought, okay, this is great. I think we can get started. The next thing was really to empower broad-based actions, right? So that's according to Kotter, the next thing you should do. Us as Mesh ID, we're a small team. We're Dutch based. We're not based in Jersey. We're talking about collaborating with organizations within Jersey. How broad of an action can we have, or an impact can we have? Well, first of all, setting up a working group is a good idea. Setting a sort of vision for sort of co-creation vision and explaining how we will go about structuring this innovation in an iterative fashion, in a collaborative manner, was a good first step. we brought together some organizations that would help us do that. These are just a few contributors that came through. But we can't really work in isolation because we need some support, some local support, and that's where Digital Jersey came in. So we actually started a work group within Sandbox Jersey, which gave us a great sort of platform for, well, exactly what their mission is to develop and test new products. So it gave us a great platform for sharing ideas, bringing parties together, and really nurturing the innovation. And I think more importantly than anything is the support that they gave us in access to government, access to regulator, and access to firms. So I think this is probably one of the biggest lessons learned for us or success factors for us was really this this idea of being integrated in the industry or in the location where you're running this project. If you run in isolation, it just will not work. You need this local support on the ground. So we've sort of formed a coalition. We've got parties together. We've set a scene or an environment for change. Then we had to decide, well, how are we going to structure this project, right? And for us, we chose Agile. If you're talking about building software these days, for us, it's a no-brainer to choose Agile. But I think this picture gives you a good idea as to why this choice was made. We had a limited number of resources and time. We wanted to have this project finished within a year, and we had a limited team to do that with. So those things were fixed. What was not fixed was the scope, was what are we going to build? We knew at a high level the problem we wanted to solve, but what we are going to build was still up in the air. So that's why Agile, the Agile methodology or Scrum methodology works very well in these scenarios. So another thing which Agile does well is generate short-term wins, and that's also part of Cotter's theory on change, is that you need to generate short-term wins to show progress and to show people that things are moving. So that's essentially what we did. We created a sort of project structure where we would, at a very high level, go through these stages, ideation, where we also implemented some design thinking practices. Had a very sort of high level discussion with the group on what the problems were, and then go through creation iterations. So go through iterations of development. And we did that by having monthly meetings with the whole group, with the whole working group. And in between the monthly meetings, we would go and sort of execute this creation iteration, and then come back to the group and show them what we built. And sometimes sort of flip between ideation again, and then back to creation and ideation creation. So until we were ready to go, until we had a product which was ready enough to pilot and then go to market. So this whole process of how we structured the project gave us a few benefits. One of the main ones was, as I mentioned, in line with Cotter's approach to change, is tangible results quicker. That makes a huge difference. If people can see the results of a project and they're tangible, i.e. software, they can click it, it makes a big difference as to their engagement in the project. We also had quite a lot of freedom to experiment. If something didn't work quite well, we could always go back to the drawing board on certain aspects and sort of do another ideation phase to move the project forward. And I think for the parties themselves, it lowers the risk significantly. If they're only meeting us once a month, we don't ask for a huge financial commitment up front from them, and in terms of time or money, then it also lowers the risk for them. And I think the main thing here is that change is the driver, and that's, I think, something that is really what made our project a success, is the fact that we could feed new ideas and new sort of feedback and requirements into the project at pretty much any stage of the project. In terms of the Agile principles, there are 12 Agile principles, but for us, I think I wanted to highlight 8, which really made a difference for us. And continuous delivery, like I mentioned, just sort of being able to deliver software continuously is extremely important. Dealing with changing requirements, extremely important. Being able to deliver frequently as well to keep people engaged. The Agile principle says that business people and developers must work together daily. For us, it was monthly, but still had the same effect. Well, this one is a funny one, knowing what happened during the year, but face-to-face conversations are better than remote. Yes, we know that, but we didn't have a choice in many aspects. And I think measuring progress in terms of software delivered, being able to come back every month with you know, something built based on the feedback of the previous meeting of the previous month, that was extremely valuable for the group to be able to sort of figure out, you know, is it going in the right direction? Is it not? Do we need to steer it? But also talking about how we're working together as a group. Do we need to change things? So being able to reflect and adjust behavior accordingly was extremely important. So once we sort of created this structure around the project and sort of explained to people how we wanted to structure the innovation, we needed to engage the group. We need to engage and enable them to help with this change. And we did this initially by bringing everyone together in a kickoff session and defining some of the biggest high-level challenges that we're going to face when looking at the vision we have. What are some of the challenges we're going to face? And I think this allowed everyone to sort of align their way of thinking. And I think more importantly than the green bits, and I'm not going to go through these obviously, but more importantly than the green bits are the blue bits, right? So what we after we had a brainstorm session, we asked the participants to indicate what the impact of these solving these challenges were, and we would dictate the ease of implementation or how difficult they would be to implement. And the green ones are obvious, but the blue ones are things that we were not going to work on. And those were I think, more valuable that came out of this than the green ones themselves. So we sort of got everyone aligned and everyone engaged. And then we needed to create some structure and way of measuring progress, even though working software is a measure of progress in Agile, but still we needed some way of sort of consolidating or grouping our efforts. So we created these challenge milestones, and these very, very high level challenge milestones, you could even equate them to sort of epics in the Agile world, but they're mega epics. You know, epics should be smaller than this, but still. And it gave us the same benefits as epics do in the Agile methodology. It sort of containerized or allowed us to group tasks together to remove dependencies. So if we were working on something for one of the challenge milestones, we could work in parallel on tasks related to another. So we tried to design these in a way that meant that there was no tight coupling between these, so we could work independently. It, like I said, helped us structure some of the development of the features and allowed us to sort of measure progress and see how far are we with each of these as we go along. And, you know, do we need to pay more or less attention to these as we go? So this was one of the ways that we sort of almost mixed in some traditional project management, sort of waterfall project management by setting these larger milestones, even though we tried to keep the development process at least on an agile method. So that's on the project structure and how we sort of ran the project. In terms of the governance, and this was a big topic, right? So as soon as we met, and you have to remember, these are large organizations. So these are, you know, large banks, established organizations. So they come into a working group like that. And the first thing they expect is, or the first thing they want to work on is governance, right? So they're sort of obsessed with governance, and we worked for large organizations, so we know how this goes. But the first question was, okay, how do we set up a board and a supervisory board and this and that? And for us, those things are killers on agile projects or software projects where you want to move fast, right? And we wanted to move fast, so. For us, we had this idea of minimal viable governance. Let's only really put in governance where we absolutely need to, and not anywhere else. And maybe we'll find at the end that we've probably made a mistake and we sort of missed some areas, but then we'll tackle it at that moment rather than try to spend a lot of time up front and create a whole governance structure that we might not even use during the project. So why do you need governance, or why did we need governance in the project? Well, the first thing was obviously making decisions. We need to have some structured way of making decisions. Normally this goes through committees and boards. For us, we made sure that we were only making the decisions that we needed to make to get us to the next immediate step. Yes, we probably should have made some more decisions looking further ahead, but if you do that, you're also making the boundaries of the playing field in the future smaller and smaller. The more decisions you make now, the more sort of shoehorned you are into a particular way of building something. So we wanted to leave ourselves flexibility in the future by really only making the decisions that were required for the immediate next step. So that means in one session, making 2 or 3 key decisions that we needed, that our developers and our team needed to have answers to be able to develop the next set of features. In terms of identifying and addressing risks, these were things that, you know, and I know from my experience in project management that, you know, this is sort of the bulk of the work for some people, is reporting and classifying risk. For us, we didn't want to do that. We didn't want to spend time documenting. What we wanted to spend time on is addressing the risks right on the spot. So if we see something, the good thing is if you have a fluid scope, you can sort of circumvent risks. If you know that there's a risk coming up, you can change your requirements to match or to go around those risks, rather than having to put in a whole bunch of mitigation actions or taking the risks, right? So this is something that we had to turn around on very, very quickly, is dealing with these risks. Approving funding requests, we didn't need any approval of funding requests because we had a fixed number of people in the team and a fixed time to do it. So there was no real change requests. Change was a driver rather than an enemy in this project. So there was no need for additional funding. Signing off on deliverables again, this is a sort of traditional sort of waterfall and agile battle, but we don't need to define the scope up front and have that signed off. We just have to make sure that we're always working on the most valuable tasks, so that by the end of the project we've built only the most valuable parts. And of course, then it's up to the development team to figure out how to make that shippable, how to make that workable as a product. But that's something that we felt very strongly about. And reporting on progress, again, it's the software, working software, that is a mark of progress, rather than having to sort of do periodic reporting and create documents and things like that for measuring progress. In terms of the challenges and the lessons learned, one of the biggest challenges we had was retention of the members. We needed to better qualify them. I think that's something we learned very early on. Is in the beginning we were sort of letting anyone in. Sometimes even because their name was great. So this is a party we should want to work with. But I think as people joined, they realized this is not quite for me, or I don't quite have the structure internally to support this kind of an innovation initiative. And we should have done a better qualifying of the parties, so which we did nearing the middle and the end of the project. But that's something that that's a challenge that we faced. Having the incorrect skills at the meetings, because the meetings are extremely important. That's where essentially the requirements come up, that we need to set to use to then fuel the development of the product for the next month. So if you don't have the right people at the meeting, it's extremely difficult to get those requirements. So we found that preparing the session up front, over preparing sometimes, and communicating beforehand, made sure that the organizations can send the right people to the sessions, rather than wasting their time or wasting our time. We needed some way of committing people financially. We found that letters of intent did that quite well. Although I must say that we still face this challenge throughout the whole project, and still at the end of the project, and to a certain extent still today, where for us one of the biggest things was how do you ensure long-term buy-in? And I think that for us, the only way to do that was to involve senior leadership at each of the organizations. But it's in some organizations it's easier said than done. Sometimes there'll be an innovation group that's extremely gung-ho about this, and their manager or at C-level, it's not sort of viewed upon with the same enthusiasm. And so it's very, very difficult to get the entire organization. And I think if you talk to people within those organizations, they'll tell you that it's even difficult within their own organization to do that. And across organizations, it's even more difficult. So it's something that we still suffer from today, but we sort of found ways around that. And another big challenge for us was that we were outsiders, right? We were and are a Dutch startup and technology company. So we had to partner with some local team to do that. And we were extremely glad that we found Digital Jersey, they found us, and that we they sort of shared our vision for change. So that was extremely important for us. But it's one of those things that, should we do a project like this in the future, we would definitely need to keep an eye on making sure that we have the right local presence. In terms of COVID, well, COVID hit us obviously very hard. It was in March when everything shut down, and that was month 3 of our 12-month project. So it was extremely difficult. I think, some of the things we've learned, and these are probably going to be obvious to a lot of you, but keeping the participants engaged in the sessions is extremely important, right? Being able to make them feel part of it. They're at home, their kids are running around, their pets are running around, my kids are running around. It's sometimes hard to be engaged in the session without someone asking something of you. So being able to make them interactive and through means of surveys or something else is extremely important. People are not going to show up to these meetings because they're busy with their own COVID plans internally in the organizations at home. So we need to increase the member count to make sure that we sort of counteract this bad attendance. We need to be a lot more structured. We don't like structure for structure's sake, so we try to sort of leave things somewhat open, especially when you meet people in a room. It's important to sort of let the conversation flow, even though we have a very high level idea and we have some guiding questions. We needed to sort of let people think it through. But remote, unfortunately don't have that attention from people. So you need to be a lot more structured. So that means you need to plan a lot, and you need to reduce the scope of things you require from people. So if previously you could ask a broad question, remotely you had to unfortunately ask maybe 2 or 3 very targeted questions and have people have a discussion within the bounds of the question. That means, yes, free thinking, but within tight borders. Whereas before it was free thinking across the entire topic, now it was free thinking within these tight borders. So setting those tight borders was extremely important for us. And one thing which helped a lot was over communicating. I mean, it really, communicating progress, things we've discovered, additional questions, some statistics that we wanted to share. People forget about you in between the sessions, and so we needed to, especially during COVID, because they were sort of busy with just dealing with the whole thing. So it was extremely important for us to sort of keep front and center in their minds as we went along. So those are sort of the COVID lessons learned. I think looking back in terms of the success factors, what were the factors that meant that we were successful in the project? I think one of the biggest ones is regulator support. We really, and especially in an industry like this where it is a highly regulated industry, it is, people tend to use the regulator as a way of escaping responsibility for change. They say, well, the regulator says it's not allowed, right? We've had situations where the regulator was actually at the table during one of our meetings where one of the parties said, well, the regulator doesn't allow that. And the regulator had to say, well, actually, we do allow that. And so it was extremely important to have their support and their presence in the project. So that was, and again, thanks to Digital Jersey for making that all possible. Another thing was the fast pace of delivery and showing tangible results. This was extremely important. There was another initiative when we didn't know about when we kicked this initiative off in Jersey. There was another one that was already ongoing for 7 years, and we found out about it, I think, in month 2 or 3 of our project. And we showed more progress in the 5 months that we ran it between January and June than they had done in the 5 years previous. So being able to keep that fast pace and show tangible results was extremely valuable for our project, and it meant that in fact we came out on top of that initiative and in some ways sort of replaced that initiative. We needed to keep people excited about the outcome. We sold the change vision initially, but when you start to get in the weeds with things, people tend to sort of forget why they're there in the first place. So every so often you have to sort of bring their head above take a bird's eye view of things again and say, look, this is where we're going. This is what this can mean for your organization or for the industry. And then sort of go back into the weeds, because if you don't do that, people get, especially people who we work with are very detail oriented and they like to analyze things. They get sort of lost in analysis. So sometimes it's important to take that bird's eye perspective again. Well, I guess engagement from the large organizations. Large organizations are harder to engage, so it took a lot more energy for us to do that, but it was extremely important. Building a product within 12 months, showing that we could do that was extremely important as well. And like I mentioned, being able to sort of counteract an initiative that was ongoing, and then being able to go faster than them and produce more results was extremely important for us, because if that was not the case, we would have probably had to stop the project in month 5 or 6. So what does this all mean for the project? Well, how did we measure the success? I guess one way we measured the success is how little time we took of these organizations. So we only had 13 meetings, and these meetings lasted for 2 hours. So you can imagine, I think across all participants, we've only spent 130 hours of their time, which is extremely low if you understand the amount of people that were in these meetings. We did a lot of development on our side, obviously, as you can see here, almost 4,500 development hours. And you see from the graph that we started off not being able to develop much because we were sort of collecting requirements all the way until December, where there's sort of panic. We had to develop the things that were still ongoing. And so that's on that side, but on the other side, it's really the satisfaction of people in the workshop. So we measured, for example, every month in surveys how well people felt that their input was incorporated, because that obviously would then have a direct impact on if the product would be sellable or not. And we had extremely high scores on that front, and also generally how they perceive the software, the sessions, and the features. So we think we did quite well on that front as well. The outcome of this whole thing really is just we've created some software that simplifies the investor CDD experience, the knowing your client experience. We allow providers to have the most up-to-date information, investors to have full control and transparency of where their data resides. We did reduce the time from months to minutes, and even if you're an investor investing in a second fund, and the first one was through Mesh ID, it really is a matter of one click, and you're onboarded. So it's extremely, the orders of magnitude faster. We significantly sped up the fund launches as well. Very importantly, we fed good data to their internal systems, which caused sort of downstream positive impact on their downstream processes. So that's the end. I mean, that we have a lot of support as well from the organizations. You might know Adam here on the picture as well. We had a lot of support on the marketing side and a lot of great feedback. And at the end, we got a great product which we're commercializing as we speak. So all in all, a great success from the project team. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I'll shoot back to Rob for any questions that came up.
Excellent. Thank you, Guy. We've had some great comments coming in through from people that's joined us today saying thank you for sharing that information. I'll go directly into the questions, and Ping has asked, for the cost of compliance, is it included in the new system implementation? What do you expect would cost increase in the new AML CFT AI automation? Would this increase the cost for the KYC, for the CDD, the customer due diligence?
Well, I think, yeah, the cost of compliance really is measured on the, on the internal operational cost of people. I mean, really, compliance cost these days is really the bulk of it is people. A software like ours will, reduce the amount of time spent by an individual significantly. Like I said, the orders of magnitude, right? So 10x, that's what we strive for, and that is essentially what we've achieved. If I understand the question correctly, it's sort of the technology element there. Does that not also cost a lot, right, to implement technology? We run this technology on a software as a service basis, and I think most systems these days do something similar. So even if you have a very high implementation cost of technology, still you'll be able to scale, because the cost of technology, the implementation of technology, is potentially high in the beginning. But as time goes on, you've automated things to cost near zero, right? Where onboarding a client could have cost your staff, 20,000 euros in time, now costs them, 500 euros in time. over time, you'll sort of recover the cost of the implementation of the software, and then from that point on, really you're scaling at a very, very high rate. So I think it's also something to keep in mind when looking at AML software. Ours, thankfully, does not take a lot of time or effort or cost to implement. But even if you find some software that does, you'll find that very, very quickly you'll sort of reach a scaling curve, which actually makes sense. And that's really what software companies also, that's how they scale, right? That's why you see software companies scaling very fast over the first few years of their lifetime, because they are able to scale. Financial service providers are not able to scale because more work is more people. So I think that, hope that answers the question.
Excellent. Thank you, Guy, and Ping, I hope that helps with your question. Ping's already come back to say thank you, Guy. Really helps. So Daryl has asked, Guy, you mentioned during the success factors of a pre-existing project that lasts over the last 5 to 7 years. Are you able to give a small insight into this?
Into the other project? Yeah, well, as far as I can talk about it, there was a sort of government-led initiative that, because you have to understand these what we're proposing here and what we've built sort of the Mesh ID CDD sharing product around is this idea that these organizations are should be leveraging each other's efforts essentially on collecting and verifying information. Now, everyone still has to make their own decisions about risk, right? So it's not that if my competitor has accepted this client, I am then able to just accept this client blindly. But my competitor has collected and verified information about this client in the past, and as long as that's verifiable and I can trust it, then I should be able to at least have a view into that information as a sort of basis to start my decision-making process. So because you're talking about companies potentially leveraging each other's information, oftentimes governments get involved or regulators get involved and say, we can do this, right? We have the responsibility as a regulator to sort of bring parties together and sometimes even centralize this KYC. What you see in some parts of the world as well is that they're creating KYC utilities, right? Where it's saying, look, all these financial service providers in this country, we will onboard your clients from sort of government stance, and then you check with us what the latest information about these clients that you're onboarding is, and so has traditionally been the approach for these kinds of solutions. We take a different approach, and we sort of decentralize that responsibility to make sure that we think it can be a communal and collaborative, industry-led rather than government-led initiative. So this other initiative that was present was really essentially a government-led initiative that had around 25 organizations, I think, that sort of met once every quarter and had a meeting and sort of discussed at a high level, but you can imagine 25 organizations discussing at a high level every quarter is not going to really move the needle forward, because a lot of parties there are probably going to shun responsibility, and they're going to say, well, I'm the biggest organization here, why should I take the burden of this project when there's a smaller organization that will benefit from it? So that's why those kinds of initiatives tend not to go, not to make that much progress. So that was in fact a similar initiative that I just mentioned was an initiative like that, where it was sort of government led and brought together a large amount of organizations.
So thank you for sharing a little bit more on that, and Daryl, I hope that helps. Scott has asked a question. You mentioned the support of the regulator. Was that matched by, say, Jersey Finance or local government, as this may be used to encourage funds to be located in the jurisdiction? Oh, put my teeth back in.
That's right. No, that's a very good question. In fact, yes. A short answer to the question is yes. Jersey Finance was involved, and in talking to all these organizations, they were all behind this idea because, yes, it makes Jersey a lot more attractive for funds to domicile in. If you can tell a fund manager, look, come and domicile your fund in Jersey, not only do we have a very sort of beneficial climate for that from all aspects, infrastructure, regulatory, But at the same time, we run on a system like this where your investors essentially get a fast track pass to any Jersey financial service providers that are providing auxiliary services like banking and law and legal services and things like that. Then yes, it's extremely beneficial, right? Your investors will only have to do this once if your funds are domiciled in Jersey. So we did have some support from the government and from Jersey Finance as well. Now, that can only go so far, obviously. So this is industry-led, so they're obviously behind us, and we're there present in the sessions. They can't really take much of an active role in pushing parties to use this, and that's again our responsibility to do. But there was definitely a lot of support from them in that regard.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott, for the question. Definitely, challenged me to say it at least. So it really does lead me to say thank you on behalf of the APM for giving up your time today to share the knowledge and also answer all the questions. I'm going to bring back Cole as well to close us off.
Yeah, thank you very much, Guy. Excellent presentation. Thanks to everyone for their time for attending today. And as mentioned at the beginning, if you are interested in volunteering at all with the APM locally in the Channel Isles, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me on LinkedIn. Okay, so that's it from us. Thanks, Rob, for your help as well, and we'll see you all again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Keep well.
Thanks. Bye-bye.